the ADF kicks off population protection drills. I'm going to show you the video in just a minute, ladies and gentlemen. So what we're talking about here are training exercises whereby the ADF are effectively equipped with the tools and tactics for dispersing large violent crowds. Okay, so measures that can be used during protests, during civil unrest, etc. I've got a video here of the training. Take a look. Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, the training that you see there, it's actually nothing new. It's been going on for years, and a lot of the tools and tactics have been used by ADF personnel all around the world, a lot of it on peacekeeping operations and so forth. But of course, the question that we need to be asking ourselves is, could the ADF in the future potentially be deployed domestically to handle, for example, protests, or should there be an occurrence of civil unrest here in Australia? And given the times we're living in, I really don't think it's a question that is out of the ballpark to at least be asking. We, of course, look back over the years during COVID, and we remember that various tactical police units were indeed deployed to the streets for the objective of really the same thing. Disbursement of crowds and making arrests during chaotic situations. And I would describe the protests that took place here in Melbourne during COVID-19 most definitely as a form of civil unrest. So of course we saw the deployment of Public Order Response, which is a tactical unit, and the deployment of the Critical Incident Response Team, which is a step up once again from Public Order Response. Critical Incident Response Team are no stranger to actually responding to events such as shootings and terrorism. And of course we can't forget that the ADF has indeed been used during COVID-19, deployed domestically for the purpose of conducting COVID policy enforcement operations such as checkpoints throughout highways and so forth. So it's really not out of the ballpark that we start to ask these questions. But before we do, we need to first ask ourselves whether or not there could be a scenario in the future that would warrant the response of the government entailing the deployment of ADF troops to disperse large crowds. So let's explore that a little bit, shall we, ladies and gentlemen? So first of all, we need to ask ourselves, under what circumstances do we generally see large-scale protests, riots, and civil unrest? Well, the patterns that we observe around the world are all exactly the same. Humans respond the same when their backs are up against the wall. So primarily, what we see when large amounts of people hit the streets and the subsequent brutal response from governments, including the military and the police, is a scenario whereby the middle class of a certain country is under attack. Okay, so that usually comes about when we see severe increases to the cost of living, which of course we're experiencing here in Australia right now. So the cost of living, including several factors such as, of course, the cost of housing, both property and rent, energy prices, water prices, food prices, fuel prices, and prices, of course, for general goods and services. Those factors alone, should they get out of control, most definitely can result in civil civil unrest. We also need to look at factors such as inflation and the devaluing of the currency. Yet again, another indication that tough times may be ahead, leading to civil unrest. We also need to look at how the government is interacting with the people. Wherever there's a scenario whereby large amounts of people have effectively had their rights eroded and the gap between the middle class and the political corporate ruling class widens, we always see a response from the people in the end. And I dare say that we're looking at a situation like that right here in Australia, with the broadening of our government, the over-regulation of policies, over-taxation, and of course we see a relentless surveillance state campaign being rolled out all around us. So, in my opinion, I don't think it's out of the question that we will see large-scale protests, riots, and civil unrest here in Australia. What people need to understand, for example, when millions of people are deprived of a means of earning an income and keeping a roof over their children and putting food on the table, it always leads to taking to the streets. When a man's back is up against the wall and he's not able to fulfill his duties, that creates a very, very dangerous man. Now, of course, we hope we don't see Australia head down this path, but there's certainly a lot of concerning indicators as to what I just mentioned, which, bringing it back to before, will we indeed see the deployment of the ADF should such an occurrence arise? It's certainly not out of the question. Now, there's still a lot of people out there who are under the impression that some type of scenario like what I've just mentioned will never happen in Australia and will never be possible. Well, the truth is that's just a whole lot of baloney. What we know, without any doubt, is that if something happened in the past, it can happen in the future. And if a certain instance has taken place in another country that experienced the same set of attributes in regards to a tyrannical government, over-regulation, and the blowout on the cost of living, devaluation of the currency, the people will respond in any place around the world in a very similar manner. A prime example, a prime case study is actually Venezuela, whereby if you look back just a couple of decades ago, Venezuela was once an incredible country, a strong economy, plenty of business opportunities, a great standard of living, and was a much sought after destination for migrants all around the world seeking a better life. Now, fast forward a couple of decades, and during that time, a socialist government took over. We also saw the price of oil crash during that time, and of course, Venezuela is an oil-based economy, just like Australia, you could describe as a mining-based economy. What we saw was the complete destruction of a society in Venezuela that was once, one could describe as the envy of the world. Mass riots, mass poverty, mass unemployment, mass amounts of murders, home invasions, and of course, a very brutal response from the government, the deployment of military to the street in order to squash the protests and riots, to the extent of military vehicles running over unarmed protesters. I've got a video here to show you some scenes from Venezuela. I'd like to give you a warning before I play the video because viewer discretion is advised, but this is indeed an example of where a society can end up should the political, societal, and economic system be completely destroyed. Take a look.
Mierda, marico. Uf.
Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, the people you saw in that video clip, they're not far-right extremists. They're not so-called anti-vaxxers. They're not from some strange anarchist movement. They're regular guys. They're fathers, they're workers, they're construction workers. They're people who had their most basic rights taken away from them, stolen under a brutal government, and the response was equally brutal. We don't want to see this in Australia, ladies and gentlemen, but it is indeed a possibility. So the question is, what do we do? Well, it goes back to knowledge being power, be informed, speak to your friends and family, keep pressure on your local politicians as much as you can, and encourage people to do the same. I also think, given the uncertainty of our economic future, that it's a great time right now, while there's a window, for everyday Australians to start exploring options of diversifying income. Look for manners in which you can earn income on the side of your regular job, should your regular job fall through. Maybe it would be a good idea to start developing skills for self-reliance and self-sustainability, such as growing food. Maybe it's time to learn the ins and outs of hunting so you can hunt your own food. So I guess my message is don't freak out. It's much better to develop tools that you don't need than to need tools that you don't have. Does that make sense? So I don't see the type of scenes that we saw in Venezuela approaching in the near future, but I just wanted to show those scenes to make people aware of what can happen should a country spiral so far down to the point in which there is no return. So think outside of the square, be smart, learn to be self-reliant, because at the end of the day, the government does not truly care for your health and well-being. They care for other interests, and the sooner that more people understand that very basic concept, the sooner we can march forward towards the cause of freedom. Thank you for watching. To make sure you never miss an episode, sign up at mcjreport.com. Catch you on the next one.